The early Bertolt Brecht.
To be familiar with, and the grammar for Chinese is not as common.
What is a title that some people may not be familiar with or comfortable?
Almost 100 years ago, Benjamin Warfield, who you may be familiar with, wrote something I came across, the little
Blue, a poem some of you might be familiar with. To where we are.
By the way, I assume most of you will be familiar with this stuff. If not, you should.
Some of you might be familiar with that reference. For those that are not, Google.
You need to be familiar with it. Turn with me to
but many of you may be familiar with the story that has been that.
Some of you may be familiar with this disease. It's also called sickle cell.
You may be familiar with that. If not, I'll tell you about it.
That you ought to be familiar with the subject is a much less common
traditional passage of time that you might be familiar with watching a clock here on the Earth's surface.
Wales case that some of you may be familiar with, but
you know, I've got kids that follow this show now, so while you might be familiar with another
art toy, you're probably familiar with this. This is the most classic example of a reconfigurable pin.
and well. You'd be familiar with the Wanjana. We used them as the image for the games in 2000. For the local people, they
visiting the seafloor in submarines, you may be familiar with